Hi, I'm Russell Sturgis. I'm the founding principal of EAP Mentor and the Enhancers Awareness Program, and welcome to the latest in our blog series. And over the last few blog sessions we've been looking at the concept of living life mindfully, and I've been sort of giving a narrative type approach to somebody who is beginning to explore what living life mindfully in a way that's more self-loving would look like. And so I want to continue that today by looking at two things, and that is the importance of developing strategies as a way of creating a really concrete sense of what a self-loving alternative reality is, and the notion of being able to facilitate the change through the process of following the path of least resistance. And it seems counterintuitive that change happens through following the path of least resistance, but hopefully by the time we finish today you'll have greater appreciation of that. So in the blog we've been talking about creating the capacity to be mindful, which requires recognising or remembering that there's a choice, and the choice being between our habitual and program ways that have resulted in us experiencing a lot of the burnout or the exhaustion and the discomfort that we have in life, versus a more self-loving alternative, what I refer to in the blog as an SLA, this more self-loving alternative that sees us being able to enjoy life and with a greater sense of purpose and a greater sense of joy in relationships and an enhanced well-being for ourselves personally. So what we have is this need to create these two alternatives. In the process of developing the more self-loving alternative, one of the things that we begin to do is to imagine what that would look like in terms of how would I be experiencing life, in terms of what would I be feeling physically, mentally, emotionally and spiritually if I was doing it in a much more self-loving way. And then of course what you've got to do in terms of creating a very solid sense of this self-loving alternative is to develop a series of strategies that you would have to adopt, behaviours and ways of thinking and emoting that would make it possible for this self-loving reality, this alternative, to be not only real but sustainable. And so in today's written blog I explore the concept of weight loss or the idea of normalising weight, and I use an example of what it requires to develop strategies in order to help really concrete that self-loving alternative. Now, once we've got the self-loving alternative much more clearly established and we're able to practice that mindfulness where we remember that we have a choice between the two, the question is, what do I do then? I've got these two alternatives and you're saying that I need to be lazy around this, and we've done the pragmatic part, which is to develop the self-loving alternative. So the lazy part is this mindfulness part. How do I act? What do I do in this place of mindfulness? And this is where I talk about this whole notion. This is the place where you follow the path of least resistance. So what is the path of least resistance? It's where there is a more established neural pathway that has become the easiest route for us to follow in our neural choices. And so that what happens is, this is our habits and our programming. And so what I say is that when you come to the place of mindfulness, what you do is follow the path of least resistance, except that there's a difference. Normally when we follow the path of least resistance, we're doing what feels good, we're doing what's the easiest thing to do, what's going to give you what you want immediately in terms of satisfying immediate needs. And that's just about satisfying our core desires and wants. What I'm talking about now as we follow this path of least resistance is following the path of least resistance with more awareness. So what that means is that we're at the place where we've been mindful, we've seen the two options, but the path of least resistance is doing what we've always done, which means that we're going to do our habit, we're going to follow our program behaviours, but this time we're doing it with more awareness. And the awareness being is, how did it serve me? So that what happens is we go down that path, and at the end of it we go, oh, I ate too much, or I shouldn't have eaten that, or I shouldn't have drunk that, or I shouldn't have spent that money, I shouldn't have spoken in the way that I did. And we develop all of this language around what we shouldn't have done, because now we're more aware. And so there's a point at which we go, okay, that isn't serving me in the best possible way, and I'm aware that when I follow that particular path, the consequence is this. So what happens is, the next time you're confronted with the choice, mindfulness says, I look at my habitual behaviours and I look at my self-loving alternative, and I identify how are these serving to me. And of course, you've just recently had an experience where this wasn't serving. However, it's still the path of least resistance, and you find yourself going down that path again. But every time you do that and you go, do you know what, the self-loving alternative would be a much better way of approaching this thing. So every time you go down the path of re-engaging what hasn't served you, through awareness, you're now starting to go, oh, the self-loving alternative would be a much better choice, and maybe I should consider that. Every time you do that, you start building and starting to create a much stronger sense of the reality of the self-loving alternative. Of course, that's reinforced every time you come to the place where you are being mindful, where you recognise that you have a choice. And that could be any time of the day where you're sort of thinking about life and what you're experiencing, and all of a sudden you go, do you know what, there's that self-loving alternative, and that's what I'd really like to align with. And as you begin to do that, you've got a clear sense of what those strategies are. You've probably even developed a hierarchy of those. In the blog I give an example of what might be the first one that you do in changing your approach to your diet. So what happens is you begin to go, do you know what, maybe I could do that. And we talked about this where the guy decides to catch the bus, and it's like, maybe I could do this. And so you start to adopt, which means that when you start to adopt, you're feeding and fueling that self-loving alternative, which is the new neural pathway. As you begin to do that more and more, you begin to shrink your old neural pathway. It's what's called pruning, and research shows that it often happens during our sleep. So good sleep's really important for helping to prune those neural pathways. As you begin to develop the new neural pathway, the old one begins to shrink through this pruning process, which means that if you think of it in terms of electrical cabling, as it shrinks, there's more resistance, which means that as the other one expands, there's less resistance, which means that it becomes the path of least resistance. And so with this transition, what happens is you automatically find yourself, without any use of will or self-determination, you don't have to use either of those things to start to begin to align yourself with the choices and the strategies that actually will end up in you experiencing that self-loving alternative. As you begin to experience the benefits of those choices, you're then able to experience a greater sense of gratitude. And of course, because you're adopting a more self-loving approach to life, this is self-compassion, you develop a greater sense of compassion for others. And it's this combination of gratitude and compassion that emotionally reinforce or supercharge this development of the new neural pathway. In any situation, for example, where you've experienced terror or fear or guilt or any of those strong emotions, they also have the capacity to develop the non-serving neural pathways, the one that causes you to shut down and be fearful and results in exhaustion. So being able to associate a very strong emotion, and gratitude and compassion are certainly strong enough to be able to really reinforce that sense of aligning yourself with the new neural pathway. It actually really speeds up the way at which that pathway becomes your modus operandi, and it becomes the new habit, and it's your new programming. You've actually applied those same words to how it is that you act and live in a way that's much more serving. The other thing that helps to create sustainability around this is this idea of being free of your narrative, which is this core set of beliefs which I've alluded to, and certainly in our next blog in this series we're going to have a look at our formative narrative, the story that emerged generally by the time that we're 7, that continues to impact and influence us as adults and keep us responding in such a way that it keeps us locked into old neural pathways, or when push comes to shove, easily takes us out of this new neural pathway that we've been working on and having us slip back into old ways of doing things. So this week, once again, we're really starting to pull apart piece by piece what this living life mindfully really looks like and how you can actually incorporate it into your life. To find out more about the Enhances Awareness Program, go to our website, eapmentor.com. And if you would like to have a daily dose of awareness and mindfulness, then go to @EAP Mentor on Facebook, and you'll find our Facebook page there where every day we've got something being posted about living life with awareness and mindfulness. Thank you for taking time to read the blog and to listen to the video, and I'll speak to you again next time. See you later. Bye.